I don't want to say that 2023 was a mediocre reading year, because we do have some highlights that I'm going to be talking about in this video. Typically, I wouldn't put 4-star books in a best of video, because for me, like, this is for my favorite books, like my new favorite books that I have discovered in the past year. But if I didn't do that, I would have 3 books to talk to you guys about today that are actually like my favorite books that I have read in the last year. So I actually have 9 books to talk to you guys about today, because over the years, like, I've read a lot of fantasy, and when I started BookTube, the bar for what I required in a fantasy for it to be 5 stars was about here. And now it's like here. So most things that I'm reading that are very, very good are hitting in like this middle distance, where they used to be a 5 and now they're just a 4. But I still love them. Like, I still have a lot of praise to give them. And last year I made a video, I can't remember what I called it, but it was essentially all of the 4 stars that I loved that didn't quite make it into my best of video because they weren't 5. This year I pretty much had no choice but to include them here. So technically I have 4 5-star reads to talk about, but one of them is one that I feel like was definitely something that I gave 5 stars in the moment, and thinking on it, it is more like a 4, or upon reread it would be more like a 4, I believe. And then the rest of them, the other 5 books, are books that I rated 4 stars. So still amazing fantasy. They're my 4.5s. If I gave a 4.5 rating, which I don't do half stars, then that is what they would be. So the 4 stars are going to be in no particular order, and then when we get to the final 3, those are in order of like what is my actual favorite book of the year. And I feel like my top 2, it's not hard for you guys to figure out. Like, if you think about it, if you've been watching a lot of my content, you will know what my top 2 books of the year are. Actually, in the comments, let me know what you think my favorite book of the year is. I bet y'all are right, because I just feel like it's so obvious. The one that we're going to talk about first is the one that I did give a 5 to, but I feel like it was a very like impulsive 5-star, and realistically I feel like it's more of a 4, and that is Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. So this is obviously like the hot book of 2023. Literally everybody was reading this, and it's also fantasy romance, so I had to give it a try. So this one is about a girl who is about to attend a war college. Her mother is like the general of the dragon riders in this world. Her father was a scribe, and she has always wanted to be a scribe. She has a chronic illness, and she thinks that based on her personality, her talents, her skills, the thing that she's been training her entire life for, she thinks that the scribe quadrant is the place for her. However, her mother has now told her that no child of hers is going to be anything but a dragon rider. So Violet is forced into the dragon riders quadrant, where essentially if you fail any of the tasks, you will die. And even if you don't die, you have to have a dragon choose you to become a dragon rider. And Violet sees herself as weak. She doesn't think that she possesses any of the qualities that a dragon values, so she thinks that she's going to end up riderless anyway. There is also a conflict in this world, and the children of the other side, I believe they're rebels, have been forced to serve this country as dragon riders. So they immediately hate Violet because of who her mother is, and that creates animosity immediately. And like the kind of low-key leader of this group and the leader of Fourth Wing, which is one of like the dragon battalions, is Xaden. And it's like an enemies to lovers story with like a series of trials, like a magic school setting. This book pretty much has every trope that everybody loves done in a way that everybody loves to see it done. In terms of the writing, when I read this, like there was nothing stand out about it. I wouldn't say it was necessarily well written. It was actually like felt like a very basic setup to a basic YA fantasy throughout the beginning of this, but I think that Rebecca Yarros actually writes the romance really well in here in a very compelling way that I kind of got swept up along in it, which is how it ended up as a 5-star read. Now I know that technically this isn't the best book that has ever been published, and especially not in 2023. The reason why this is so popular is because like the sheer amount of hype and stuff that surrounds it, not because it's like a masterpiece of literature. But I do think that Rebecca Yarros really nailed all of these things that people love to read about. She put them all into one book and executed them in a way that was good enough for people to eat this up, like myself included. So I would say that this definitely does deserve a place on my best books of the year list, but in hindsight, I would say it was more of a 4 than a 5. Like the feeling I had when I was reading it caused the 5-star rating. With that hindsight, I'm like, okay, yeah, maybe you're a 4. One book that I read recently and loved is Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. This is one of my rainy day books. You know those books that you have had for years and you don't read them because you know you're gonna love them, so apparently you don't deserve, like you shouldn't love things, so you just never actually enjoy those things. Gideon was that for me, and I'm so happy that I really loved it, because there's also like fear of disappointment really plays into things like when you're pushing off books like that. All I knew going into it is that everybody describes it as lesbian necromancers in space, and I had no idea what the plot was. So this one is about a young woman called Gideon who is part of the 9th necromantic house in this like universe, solar system, whatever you want to call it, and she actually hates the 9th house because they have been nothing but horrible to her, and the house is also dwindling. There are very, very few members left. So Gideon is desperate to escape, and one day she is attempting to escape when the daughter of 9th house Harrow stops her, and she says, if you come and hear me out, like I will potentially give you your freedom. So Gideon goes and finds out that there is a almost competition that is happening for people to become the next Archlector. So all of the leaders, or like the children or the heirs of the necromantic houses, are going to come together and essentially compete to become these lectors, which are like legendary immortal knights or soldiers kind of thing. Harrow asks Gideon to go as her cavalier and says like, you will gain so much notoriety from this, like you'll become famous, you can go anywhere you want and you can have your freedom if you do this for me, because nobody else can. So Gideon kind of reluctantly agrees, and they go to first house where this competition is taking place. And it is like a competition or trials, but not in the traditional sense, because they arrive at this like crumbling gothic castle on a planet, and they are given one cryptic clue, and they kind of have to figure out what they're doing from there. And there's also a murder mystery element in here when some of the people in this castle start to die one by one, and everybody who's left is trying to figure out what's happening. I really loved the humor in here. I loved the atmosphere, because when I read, like I know I'm reading a good book if I can see it in my head. Like if it's playing like a movie in my mind, then I know that I'm having a good time, and I immediately sunk into the atmosphere of this. I listened to the audiobook, which I think definitely helped, but I did do it whilst reading along, because if I'd have done one or the other, I feel like I would have gotten lost quite easily. But I think that the like performance, the narration of the audiobook really helps to ground you in this story and give you a better understanding of what is going on. Now, the majority of the book does follow that kind of plot that I laid out for you, but the thing that I really enjoyed about this is that throughout it there were little hints of things that hinted at a larger plot, and that is what I love. I really like fantasy series where you get an almost self-contained plot in book one, but it hints that there is more out there, like there's more to explore, there's more plot, there's more world. And as the book kind of draws to a close, it starts to like open up that secondary thing that we're leading into, which Gideon definitely did, and that's how I know that it's a story I like, when I can tell that there's more and I want to know what more is. So I'm very excited to carry on with this series. I'm desperate to read Harrow, and I'm so glad that after putting this off for so long, like I did end up really loving it. A sequel that I really enjoyed in 2023 is The Battle Drum by Sarah Elarifi. There is no good way for me to hold this one because it's the Goldsboro special edition, so it has like no surface with the title on. But this one is the sequel to The Final Strife, which I've said it once, I will say it again. The Final Strife is the best start to a fantasy series I have read in a long time. Y'all are sleeping on it. I know that Sarah Elarifi is getting a little bit more buzz now because of the release of Fairbound, but you need to read The Final Strife. The Final Strife reminded me a little bit, it reminded me of two things. One of them was Rage of Dragons by Evan Winters, and I can't remember what the other thing, Red Rising. Which is, I mean, if you say Red Rising, I'm immediately interested. But we're following three characters set in a world that is divided by blood. You have the blue bloods that are not quite the working class, they're more of like a peasant class. You have the red bloods, which are the nobility, the royalty, anybody important, and also a lot of the merchants and regular citizens. And then you have the translucent blooded people, who are essentially the servants or the slaves of this world. And we are following a main character from each of these types of blood. 20 years before this series starts, there was a group, like a rebellion group, that swapped blue-blooded and red-blooded children so that they could take the red-blooded children, show them the oppression faced by the lower classes, and train them to compete in a series of trials that happens every so many years that picks the next leaders of the world. So one of our main characters is Scylla, who is one of these red-blooded children that was taken and raised among the blues. However, this rebellion like completely collapsed. The leaders were killed, and so she is kind of existing in this world aimlessly with no purpose anymore. We're also following Honor, who is a member of a prominent family within this community. She lives amongst the red bloods, but she is actually one of the children that was swapped and has blue blood herself. And we're following Hassa, who is one of the translucent blooded members of this society. So the plot of the first book pretty much follows this series of trials that picks the leadership, and then when we get to book 2, the battle drum, the world opens so much more, and that is what blew my mind. I think, as well as really struggling to get into new fantasy series over the last few years, I've also found second books in a series disappointing. Like, they haven't built upon the foundations they made in book 1 to a way that I found satisfactory, and this is one of the first series I've read in a long time where I feel like the follow-up to book 1 did an amazing job with what book 1 kind of set up to do. We learned so much more about the society, the politics, the world in general in here. I just kind of wish that these books were a little bit longer. I know that Sarah Elarifi can do a lot with like 400 pages, but I just want more. Like, there's so much, and it's actually quite amazing how it's all kind of contained in 400 pages, but I would read like 600 page books in this series, no problem. There is also a sapphic romance in here if that's something that you're interested in, but the world building and the execution of this series is what I love about it so much, and I'm so excited to read Fairbound, and also the third book in this series that's coming out later in 2024. Next up, we have one that I really actually thought I wasn't going to like at all, and I keep thinking about it, and that is A Discovery of Witches by Deborah Harkness. So when I'd heard this described, when I kind of read the synopsis of this, I picked it up because I know a lot of people love it, but I didn't think that I was going to. I know that history plays a big part in this, but it also has a level of academia that borders on pretension, which normally really annoys me. But the way that it lends itself to this paranormal romance story is just, it just works. It's just a combination that works. When I went into this, I expected it to think very highly of itself and be really pretentious about it, but this book reads like Twilight for adults, and that pairing just should not work. Like, the setting and the level of detail in the history and the historical accuracy and the paranormal romance in here should not be a good mix, and for some reason it just works so well. So this one is about a woman called Diana who is a witch, but she's kind of shied away from her gift. She's not really interested in learning more about witchcraft, but she comes from a family of witches, and she works at Oxford. She calls this manuscript from the library for a research project. She looks at it and she puts it back. After that, lots of witches, vampires and demons start to kind of lurk and follow her around, and she's really confused about this until she finds out that the manuscript that she called has actually been lost for centuries and potentially pertains to the creation of all supernatural creatures. So it's this super valuable manuscript that everybody wants, and everybody's trying to manipulate her into calling it for them, like for their faction. One of the people who's drawn to her at this time is Matthew, who is this like ancient vampire. Like, forget Edward, forget Angel, forget like Rhysand. The age of Matthew blows all of them out of the water. Like, he is truly old. He is also drawn to Diana because of this manuscript. They end up growing much closer, and he is also trying to protect her from all of these people who are desperate to get their hands on this manuscript to know that Diana is the key. Deborah Harkness has a background as a historian, so there is a lot of history in here that goes right over my head, and also the intricacy of things like Oxford and that level of academia, not my vibe, also goes right over my head. But what the detail does, what all of that little added information does in here, even when we're talking about Templars and my like knowledge of those time periods is very hazy, is that it almost adds like a level of realism to the story that made me just believe this a little bit more. Like, I felt like this could be legit. Like, Diana and Matthew, the witches, the demons, the vampires could all exist out there in like the English countryside and around Oxford, and I would totally believe it. So I really love that about it, because it's interesting, because when I read contemporary stories, especially romance, I want them to be like angsty, dramatic, wild and unbelievable. But when we're talking about fantasy, I need to believe that it could be happening somewhere, or it could have happened. Otherwise, you've lost me. And A Discovery of Witches definitely did that. Also, I read Twilight 15 times between the ages of 13 and 17. So I was 13 when Twilight was released as a book, and I read it over and over and over again until after I'd read Breaking Dawn. So that little supernatural fangirl inside me loved the fact that this was almost beat for beat Twilight, but for adults. Like I will say it, I always say it, I don't like paranormal romance, I don't like supernatural romance, but what this does is it blends like paranormal historical fantasy a little bit, and also not like high fantasy because this is set in the real world, but like a scope of plot and a complexity of society and world that I don't often see in paranormal romance, which tends to be quite episodic. So yeah, you can say that I'm a big fan of this one. I actually don't like Matthew though, so it's not even like I was reading this for the romance. I'm not a fan of him. He gives me a lot of red flags, but I ate this up and I'm really excited to continue the series. One that I read very early in the year and I like swore I was going to continue and I haven't. I really need to make it a priority to continue on with sequels, because what I'm finding is that I'm now worried about not loving the sequels because I'm not as in the story as I was when I read the first book. But that is We Hunt the Flame by Hafsa Faisal. This one is a YA fantasy that I was kind of never really interested in reading because I'd heard some decent things about it, but my time for getting really excited about YA fantasy at this point has passed. So I was a little bit nervous about this one, but this is one of the YA fantasies that I would say in terms of like the scope of the world, the complexity of the plot, the pacing of it is a little bit more like an upper YA fantasy or like a new adult fantasy. But in this one, we are following a young woman who is the huntress. Nobody knows her gender though, they refer to her as the hunter. And this is set in a world where something has happened that has messed up all of the areas of this world. So where the main character lives should be very hot and very dry, and instead it is very cold and very wet. And this environment is not supposed to deal with those weather conditions. So the buildings are getting a lot of damp, a lot of mold, they're splitting apart because they weren't built to withstand things like snow. And this is the same for every area, although the circumstances of each area is a little bit different. And then in the middle of this world, there is a forest that is it's like a cursed forest. Nobody can enter it apart from the huntress. And so the Sultan gets wind of this and he sends the huntress after a precious artifact, and he says the reason why he wants it is so that he can return to the world to how it's supposed to be. But he actually sends his son after the huntress to kill her after she has gained the artifact so that he can use it for his own nefarious purposes. This reminded me a lot of Throne of Glass, not in a way where it's like a rip-off of Throne of Glass or the plot's the same as Throne of Glass, but I had the same kind of feeling reading this book as I did when I was reading Throne of Glass, like how many years ago? I think I read the first book for the first time 8-9 years ago now. So it had that like slightly nostalgic feel to it to me, and I feel like that level of like well structured and well plotted fantasy is very uncommon to find in YA, as well as a romance that's kind of full of angst. We have this not forbidden romance but like star-crossed lovers element in here as well that I always eat up, as well as an enemies to lovers story. I think I actually, the more I look at this book, the more I want to reread it before I read the sequel actually. So I think I'm gonna do that at some point. I don't know whether it's because I've been talking about fantasy a lot recently, but I just want to get into like a real meaty series that I love that makes me feel a certain way, you know. So I'm definitely going to be on the hunt for one of those in 2024, as well as finishing up some of these ones that I've already started. And then the last of the 4 stars is another one that y'all are sleeping on, guys. This is like a lot of series that you love and you need to pick it up, and that is The Pomegranate Gate by Ariel Kaplan. So this one was an arc that was sent to me by Solaris, and it was described as like a historical fantasy, which is something that I have recently discovered over the last couple of years that I do really enjoy, kind of dependent on the time period. But this one is inspired by medieval Spain, and it is inspired by a time that I think is around like the 14th or 15th century, where Christianity was taken over and all of the Jewish people were told that they had to convert to Christianity or they had to leave the city. So in here we are following 2 characters who have chosen to leave, and they're joining a caravan. Now our female main character can speak but she can't shout, and she can walk but she can't run, and so she starts to fall behind behind this caravan, and somebody sees that and takes advantage of her and starts to draw her into the woods, and there's nothing she can do about it because she can't move any faster and she can't shout for help. Our male main character sees this and he follows her into the woods, where he sees her disappear into the Pomegranate Gate, which leads to a different dimension. Now this place where our female main character goes is like this demon dimension almost. It reminds me a lot of the City of Brass in the David series by S.A. Chakraborty, and it does have a lot of similar elements in that setting, so if you're a fan of the David trilogy, I think you will enjoy this. The setup that our female main character finds herself in also reminded me a lot of ACOTAR, not in that this is a fantasy romance, although it does have a romantic subplot, but in terms of the fact that she ends up on this like sprawling estate where there's this kind of like isolated lord, and I think it's like his nephew lived there and nobody else. And on the other side, like in the real world, our male main character seeks out the female main character's grandmother, and he ends up on this like wild goose chase with an old woman trying to find the girl and like bring her back to this dimension. Meanwhile, everything that's going on in like this demon realm is paralleling the human realm, and it's like quite apparent that like they mirror each other and they're very closely connected. So I really liked the setting of this. It has like elements of the Winter Night trilogy in the way we have this like blend of Jewish folklore and also like Spanish history. So like a very seamless, in my opinion, combination of history and fantasy, like the Winter Night trilogy does with, I think is it 14th or 15th century Russia and Russian folklore, but that is also set at a time where Christianity is sweeping through the land and kind of like erasing the old gods and the folklore. We have this dimension that reminds me a lot in setting and atmosphere of the City of Brass, and also those slight ACOTAR elements. I really liked the romantic elements. I liked the characters. I really liked the way that this conflict is happening on both sides in both realms, but in like a different way that still kind of makes sense. And I love the atmosphere of this. So if any of what I said sounds good, I do urge you to pick this up. This is by no means a hyped release. It is definitely, of everything I've read that's in this video, it's the underdog. Like it's probably this and potentially the Battle Drum, I would say, are probably the only fantasy books in this video that I would say you're less likely to have heard of. So if anything I've said sounds interesting, then definitely do go ahead and check this one out. I loved it. And then into my 5-star reads. This shows you how picky I am when it comes to fantasy specifically, because not a single one of my 3 best reads of the year are fantasy. One is fantastical but not fantasy, and it's purely because I'm picky. Like it takes a lot for a 5-star fantasy, so I'm actually very comfortable and very happy with my decision to include 4-star reads this year, because like I truly adored these books, and in hindsight the way that I feel about them over time, like they're a 5-star in my heart. Even if I didn't rate them 5 stars at the time. So the next one, which does officially come in at number 3, this is my 3rd best book of the year, is a psychological horror, I want to say, and that is The Last House on Needless Street by Katrina Ward. This is one that I had heard a lot of really good things about, but nobody had ever really told me what it was, and I in turn am not really going to tell you what it is. Knowing nothing about this is the best way to go into it. I know a lot of people have strong opinions and don't like this book, and I completely understand why. I feel like it has like a very polarizing element in that regard, but it's just the manipulation of the reader. The way that Katrina Ward manipulates your emotions is one of the reasons why I love this one so much. So to give you the bare bones of this without giving anything away, this story is about a man who lives in the last house on Needless Street, and he lives with his daughter and also with his cat. We have, I think, 3 perspectives in this book. One is the man, one is the cat, and the other one, the 3rd perspective, is the sister of a little girl that went missing. I think it was around 10 years before the book starts. The little girl went missing when her family were on holiday on like a little day trip on a lake. The little girl's sister moves into this area because she believes that the man has kidnapped her sister. The thing that I loved about this is how it made me so uncomfortable. Like if you don't want to feel gross and disgusting and uncomfortable when you're reading a book, this is not the one for you, because I felt awful the entire time that I was reading this. And then for it to flip a switch at some point in here and give you like perspective and clarity, and the way that you then question yourself and your own preconceptions is masterful. It's genius. And like I said, I understand why a lot of people have very strong emotions in the opposite direction and really don't like this book. I do definitely understand that. But for me, it's the skill that Katrina Ward possesses, and also turning the mirror on you and showing you that like you did this. Like it was you. It wasn't the book. It wasn't the author, in my opinion. It was the reader that was responsible for the feelings, which isn't going to make sense if you haven't read it. But if you have, maybe it will. So do be aware that this is going to make you feel super uncomfortable. Also, massive content warnings for obviously like kidnap, very violent abuse, physically, psychologically, and also like self-harm, suicide kind of themes in here as well. A lot of really, really triggering topics. So if you are sensitive to that, I would recommend looking up like a detailed list of triggers. If you are somebody who likes deeply disturbing books and you want to feel really uncomfortable, I feel like The Last House on Needless Street will definitely give you that. So the reason why we only have 3 stars in this video, aside from the fact that I think I only had like a maximum of 15 5 stars overall, is that a lot of the 5 stars I gave were all to the same author and in some ways to the same series, and I only include like 1 book per series in my best of video, but I try to only have 1 book per author in here as well. And we all know that in 2023 I discovered Ali Hazelwood. So my second best book of 2023 was The Love Hypothesis, which I think is still my favorite of all of the Ali Hazelwood books that I've read. It is difficult because I feel like when I find something like a series or an author, the newness of it always makes me look more favorably upon it. So maybe I did enjoy Love on the Brain or Love Theoretically a little bit more, but because Love Hypothesis was my introduction, it remains my favorite. So I was very nervous about this because I knew it was a super hyped contemporary romance, which was fine, but I also knew that it was Reylo fanfic, and there is so much of that about, and I don't understand it. In every video where I read a Reylo fanfic and love it is the thing. Like all of the Reylo fanfic published books that I've read, I've loved, okay, but I don't understand the hype around Reylo and Kylo Ren. I've seen those movies. I don't know where it's coming from, okay? Like I don't get it. I don't get it, but I do love the product of it. So I was a little bit nervous because I do not think that Adam Driver is hot at all. I do not see it, although reading these books is making me kind of see it because I feel like it's exposure therapy. At this point. This one in particular is about a girl who is she a PhD student? This does not have a synopsis in because it's the Illumicrate dust jacket. I think it's not going to help me out, is it? I think she's a PhD student and there is a PhD professor or like mentor that everybody hates because he's super, super harsh. And the main character has an ex-boyfriend. I think she only dated him for a little while and she has no like feelings for him whatsoever, but her roommate or like her best friend is really into him. But because of girl code, her best friend won't make a move. So Olive, the main character, says that she has a date so that her friend will feel like she can go out with this guy that like she's interested in. So Olive is actually working on her PhD project when she's supposed to have this date, and her friend actually comes into the university. So Olive kind of just panics and doesn't want her friend to know that she was lying, and she just sees this guy and grabs him and kisses him, and it turns out to be this professor that everybody hates. So then they start to fake date so that her friend thinks she's actually moved on, and also because the university has been withholding Adam's funds because they think he's a flight risk, so they don't want to invest in like his projects that he's working on. I really like the Ali Hazelwood formula because Ali Hazelwood always has like a super quirky main character that's really highly strung and can't see like past the end of her nose, has no concept of what's going on in front of her, and a tall, brooding, like really serious, grumpy love interest that's low-key obsessed with the main character, and I eat it up. It's also the same dynamic as in The Hating Game, which is my favorite contemporary romance of all time. So while a lot of Ali Hazelwood's plots are very similar, while her characters are very much copy and paste, it's a formula that I love and I will seek it out constantly, and I really think that Ali Hazelwood does it very, very well. And then my favorite book of 2023, let's see if you were right down in the comments. I feel like some of you might have guessed Love Hypothesis, but my favorite book book of 2023 is undoubtedly Lightbringer by Pierce Brown. Red Rising is my favorite series of all time. Sarah J. Who is what I'm saying right now, because I think previously my favorite series of all time was potentially ACOTAR before it was extended past 3 books. But I'm a Red Rising girly through and through now. I cannot believe there was life before Darrow. I do not want to believe it. This is book 6 in the series, so I'll give you a synopsis of book 1, but know that we're very far away from that at this point. The Red Rising series follows a guy called Darrow who is a red in a society that is split into a colour caste system with reds at the bottom and golds right at the top. So as a red, Darrow and his people believe that they are mining for a very valuable substance called helium-3, which will allow the solar system to be terraformed so that humanity can escape the dying planet Earth. However, after Darrow's wife makes herself a martyr to spur Darrow into action, he goes to the surface of Mars and he realizes that not only have the planets been terraformed, this ain't like a new development. They were terraformed a long time ago, and his people are actually being kept in slavery. So Darrow then joins a rebellion and infiltrates the gold with the idea or the purpose of tearing them apart from the inside. Book 1 gets compared to The Hunger Games a lot. It also gets called YA, but if you read past book 1, you'll know that it's absolutely not. I don't even, like, if you get to in the last 100 pages of the book 1, it's not. And there is some dark shit in this series. Like, it gets real bad where it's bad. I love this series in general because Pierce Brown doesn't pull his punches. There are casualties in this series and his plot twists are so shocking. Like, they will punch you in the gut when you least expect it. There is also like a lot of themes of things like found family, which we all know I love, but also like brotherhood, but there's also a lot of betrayal. And because of the nature of the relationships in here, the level of drama, the level of angst, the level of betrayal is so Shakespearean and dramatic with backstabbing that I eat it up. Like, the drama level is 900. You don't even get this level of drama watching the most recent series of Vanderpump Rules, let me tell you. So this one in particular was going to probably end up on my best books of the year list purely because it was the latest release in one of my favorite series, but this one in particular did have something a little bit extra special about it. This is actually my favorite or second favorite book in the entire series as a whole, and that is because the first 3 books in Red Rising can stand alone as a trilogy, and then it skips 10 to 15, I think it's about 10 years since the end of book 3. We kind of set up a new story arc where the best way to describe it is that they've won the battle, but they haven't won the war, and there's still a lot of work to be done. And the second story arc also deals a lot with the repercussions of some of Darrow's actions in the first trilogy. So I actually read books 4, 5 and 6 this year, and in book 4 we set up the story arc. In book 5 we take everybody to a truly dark place, and book 6 reminded me that Red Rising could be good, because it's been a few years since I read books 1, 2 and 3, and so this reminded me of what it was like in my favorite books in the series, book 2 and 3. It reminded me that there is joy in this series because for a while there I completely forgot. And it also reinforced a lot of the relationships that are my favorite relationships throughout this entire series, and then it made me cry like a baby. Like, I am still devastated by the end of this, and the way that Pierce Brown handled it, the way that it was delivered, I thought was very well executed, because similarly to the big sob moment in Robin Hobb's Realm of the Eldlings, knowing what was happening didn't make it any better. It almost made it worse. So I am very eagerly awaiting Red God, but because I know that's the end of the series, I'm actually really worried for some of the main characters, because I mean, when a series has ended, you don't need any characters, because like there's nowhere for it to go, you know. So a lot could happen in Red God, and I am scared. I am going to reread the entire Red Rising series as well before that. We obviously don't have a release date for Red God yet, but I'm really excited to go through that pain again. Like, sign me up, please. So there you have my 9 best books of 2023. I went into this video being like, I don't want to say 2023 was mediocre, but felt kind of mediocre. And I feel like this happens every year, but then talking through these books in this video has made me realize, like, actually no, you know what, there's a lot of good books here. And coming off the back of a mediocre month in December, I feel like I needed this to kind of reignite my joy of reading, and I might actually just go spend the rest of my day reading now because I'm feeling it. It's also got me like so excited, as I said, to get back into some like real good fantasy and also check out some of the sequels of these books that I loved so much in 2023. But down in the comments, let me know what your favorite book of 2023 is, because I would love to know. And aside from that, guys, please don't forget to like this video if you liked it and subscribe if you wanna. If you head to my description box, you'll find a link to my Goodreads, Instagram and Twitter if you'd like to follow me on any of those, as well as a link to my Bookish candle website, the Etsy for that, and a 10% off discount code. But that's it from me today, guys. Bye.
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you'll go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.